You gotta pack up your tent and ride. Pack up your tent and ride. Good grub cooking on a fire tonight. Pack up your tent and ride.
Hi, I'm Fraser Douglas, and I've been an avid tent camper now for over 55 years. Over these 55 years, I have cooked a lot of good tasting meals in our campsite, and I have learned several tips for safe kitchen knife handling. And so I decided I'd like to share some of my tips with you. In my first video, I shared 8 kitchen knife safety tips. And now in this video, I want to share 7 more safety tips. I hope you'll find something of value in each of these 2 videos. I'll begin this video with tip number 9, the most controversial of all of my tips. Despite strong arguments to the contrary by most knife enthusiasts, I firmly believe that a super sharp knife is more dangerous than a dull knife. In other words, I believe that you are much more likely to cut yourself with a super sharp knife than with a dull knife. I base this belief upon 3 different sets of observations. First, over the past 55 years, I have cut myself with a super sharp knife about a dozen times. And I've never cut myself with a dull or a semi-sharp knife. Most of these cuts were relatively minor, but a couple of them were a little more serious and should have had a few stitches. Second, over my lifetime, I have known of about 25 knife makers, butchers, and cooks who have cut themselves with super sharp knives. But I've never heard a story about one of these professionals that cut themselves with a dull knife. Most recently, my friend Bill Bullard, that's been a knife maker for over 45 years and who made my favorite kitchen knives, just posted this photo showing his finger that he cut with a super sharp knife. My third set of observations pertain to responsible child training practices. Over my lifetime, I have known many parents that allowed their young children to practice cutting their foods with super dull table knives, but I have never known of a parent that would have allowed their child to use a super sharp knife because they intuitively knew that the child is much more likely to cut themselves with a super sharp knife than with a dull table knife. But despite all of the evidence showing that a super sharp knife is more dangerous than a dull knife, I still prefer to use a super sharp knife in the kitchen because it makes it so easy to prepare all of the ingredients that are needed to make great tasting meals. My 10th tip is to understand that knives with thick blades will be more difficult to control and thus more dangerous than knives with thin blades, especially if those thick blades have a saber or Scandinavian grind. Or put more simply, select a kitchen knife with a thin blade rather than one with a thick blade because the thin-bladed knife will be safer. For example, compare the Benchmade knife at the top with the Wusthof knife at the bottom. They look similar in that they both have stainless steel blades that are about 4.5 inches long and about 1 to 1.5 inches wide. But the Wusthof knife is much better suited and much safer for food prep chores than the Benchmade knife, which incidentally was made for wood processing chores. The Wusthof knife shown on the right in this photo is much safer for kitchen chores because it has a much thinner blade and because it has a full flat grind that starts at the spine and tapers consistently down to the edge. When a thin bladed knife slices through any food such as a tomato, it will usually follow a straight vertical pathway, while thick knives, especially those with saber and Scandi grinds, will frequently veer to either the left or the right and may veer dangerously close to the hand that's holding the food. Several years ago, I sliced off the tip of my thumb when one of these thick saber ground knives unexpectedly veered toward my hand, and the knife was so sharp I never felt it touch my thumb. My 11th tip is to avoid using super sharp knives after consuming alcohol, marijuana, or other drugs that could impair your coordination. Now, today at my age, this tip seems very obvious. If it impairs your coordination, you're more likely to cut yourself. But when I was younger, it wasn't so obvious. My two worst knife cuts occurred on two different occasions when I had been drinking beer with my friends and then decided to show them how sharp my knives were. My 12th tip is don't use a super sharp knife to smash garlic in order to remove its skin. Although many cooks demonstrate this procedure in their videos, it is a good way to cut yourself. Instead, I suggest that you cut off the two root ends with your knife and then use another flat surface, such as the handle of a spatula, to smash the garlic. After smashing it, it'll be very easy to remove the skin. My 13th tip is don't use a super sharp knife to peel an apple or a potato. Although many cooks have demonstrated this procedure, it is dangerous because it involves cutting toward your finger or your hand with a super sharp knife. And you should never do this. You should always cut toward a chopping board. So when you need to peel a fruit or a vegetable, use a peeler instead of a super sharp knife. Many people also peel their carrots, but I usually just scrape them with my knife edge. My 14th tip is to wash and dry your knife immediately after each use and then return it to its sheath. If you don't wash and dry it immediately, the blade could rust, especially if the blade is made from a carbon steel. And if you don't return it to its sheath immediately, it could easily get mixed in with other kitchen utensils on your countertop or in your sink. And when you reach into those utensils to get something, you could easily cut yourself by the unprotected blade. My 15th and last kitchen knife safety tip is to understand that safe kitchen knife habits are skills that must be learned from experience. Therefore, children and other people with limited knife experience should use cut-resistant gloves and or dull knives until they learn basic knife skills. For example, we just gave this beautiful knife and fork set made by Bill Bullard to our grandson, Leonardo. But since he is an inexperienced knife user, we did not have the blade sharpened, and so it is a very dull knife, except at the tip where it has tapered to the point. Today, Leonardo is learning how to cut a ripe tomato with that dull knife. Notice that he's using cut-resistant gloves. Well, that concludes my 15 kitchen knife safety tips. I hope you found something of value in these videos. For more information about camp kitchen knives and procedures, please visit my website, moderntentcamping.com. And while you're there, visit my Amazon store page for links to some great kitchen equipment. Let me show you how I cut a melon. First, I cut it in half, and then I put half of that melon on that flat surface for further cutting. Then I can safely cut sections, remove the seeds, and remove the rind. And you'll definitely need a super sharp knife to cut fresh baked bread.
Take more trips, travel further, visit more attractions, and spend less money. Go tent camping. Thanks for watching.